Welcome to Lore of the Lost, where we uncover stories from the past steeped in truth and historical accuracy. Get unheard of perspectives and discover what life was really like during these times. Listen to the boring history as you drift off into another world. I am George Lancaster, your speaker tonight, and please let me hear where you're listening from and what time it is for you in the comments. Now listen along as we venture into the smoky workshops and cobbled streets of late medieval Europe, where the ring of hammer on anvil echoed through narrow alleyways, and craftsmen shaped both iron and their own uncertain destinies. In the autumn of 1487, in the bustling market town of Nuremberg, lived Heinrich Müller, a blacksmith whose weathered hands bore the permanent stains of soot and whose shoulders carried the weight of both his trade and his troubles. At 32 years of age, Heinrich had inherited his father's forge, along with the guild membership that allowed him to practice his craft, yet prosperity remained as elusive as the perfect tempering of steel. His workshop occupied the ground floor of a narrow timber-framed building, its walls blackened by years of smoke and sparks. The constant clang of his hammer had worn grooves in the cobblestones outside, where horses waited patiently to be shod, and merchants haggled over the price of nails, hinges, and simple tools that formed the backbone of daily commerce. The first pale light of dawn found Heinrich already stirring the coals in his forge, coaxing yesterday's embers back to glowing life with careful breaths from his leather bellows. The ritual began before cockcrow, as it had for generations of smiths before him, because iron waited for no man and customers expected their work completed when promised. His apprentice, young Klaus, would not arrive for another hour, leaving Heinrich alone with the meditative rhythm of preparation that had become as natural as breathing. He arranged his tools with practiced precision. Hammers of varying weights, tongs blackened by use, and the collection of specialized implements that marked him as a craftsman rather than a mere laborer. The forge gradually warmed the workshop, driving away the October chill that seeped through gaps in the wooden walls and reminded him that winter approached with its own particular hardships. Heinrich's first task involved completing a commission for the local monastery, a set of iron hinges for their new grain storage building. The Benedictine brothers paid reliably, though their negotiations were lengthy and their expectations exacting, requiring him to demonstrate both patience and precision in equal measure. He selected a bar of wrought iron, examining its surface for flaws that might compromise the finished work, knowing that his reputation depended upon delivering pieces that would endure decades of use. The iron had traveled far to reach his forge, smelted in the distant Harz Mountains and shaped by water-powered hammers that could accomplish in minutes what would take him hours by hand. This dependence on distant suppliers meant that the cost of raw materials fluctuated unpredictably, sometimes consuming the majority of his earnings and leaving little profit for his labor, skill, and the years of training that enabled him to transform crude metal into functional artistry. As the iron heated in the forge, glowing from black to deep red to the bright orange that indicated readiness, Heinrich reflected on the precarious nature of his livelihood in an age where economic uncertainty was as common as morning mist. The guild system that governed his trade provided certain protections, regulating prices and preventing unqualified competitors from undercutting established craftsmen. Yet it also imposed restrictions that limited his ability to adapt to changing circumstances. He could not simply relocate to seek better opportunities, nor could he easily expand his business beyond the boundaries established by centuries of tradition. The guild masters, prosperous men who had long since moved beyond the daily grind of forge work, made decisions that affected every aspect of his professional life, from the number of apprentices he could train to the types of work he was permitted to undertake, creating a system that prioritized stability over individual ambition. Klaus arrived as the church bells marked the second hour after sunrise, his young face still bearing the marks of sleep, and his movements carrying the eager energy of youth not yet worn down by years of repetitive labor. At 16, the boy had been apprenticed to Heinrich for 2 years, bound by contracts that would keep him in service for 5 more, learning not just the techniques of metalworking, but the broader skills of managing a workshop, dealing with customers, and understanding the complex web of relationships that sustained the urban economy. Heinrich remembered his own apprenticeship, The endless hours of pumping bellows, sorting scrap metal, and performing the countless mundane tasks that gradually built the strength and endurance necessary for forge work. The relationship between master and apprentice involved far more than technical instruction. Heinrich was responsible for Klaus's moral development, his housing, his food, and his eventual preparation for the examinations that would qualify him as a journeyman, free to travel and work for other masters while perfecting his skills. Together, they began the methodical process of shaping the monastery hinges, Heinrich wielding the heavy hammer, while Klaus managed the lighter work of holding pieces steady and maintaining the fire at optimal temperature. The rhythm of their collaboration had developed over months of working together, a wordless communication that allowed them to coordinate their movements with increasing precision and efficiency. Heinrich demonstrated the proper angle for each hammer blow, explaining how the grain of the metal responded to force and heat, how to recognize the subtle signs that indicated when iron was ready for the next stage of shaping. These lessons extended far beyond technical knowledge, encompassing the deeper understanding of materials and processes that separated skilled craftsmen from mere laborers. Knowledge that could not be learned from books, but only absorbed through countless hours of practice under the guidance of an experienced master who had himself learned through similar apprenticeship decades earlier. The morning's work proceeded steadily, punctuated by the arrival of customers seeking various services that formed the bread and butter of Heinrich's trade. A merchant's wife brought a broken pot handle, its iron loop snapped under the weight of heavy stew, requiring a repair that would take only minutes but provided the small, immediate payments that kept his household functioning between larger commissions. A farmer from the surrounding countryside needed new shoes for his draft horse, a routine task that nonetheless demanded careful attention to the animal's gait and the specific wear patterns that indicated how the shoes should be shaped and fitted. Each transaction involved not just the technical work of metalworking, but the social skills necessary to maintain relationships with customers whose continued patronage determined his economic survival, requiring him to balance fair pricing with the need to earn enough to support his family and maintain his workshop in good condition. As the sun climbed higher, the workshop grew uncomfortably warm, filled with the acrid smoke that inevitably accompanied forge work and the metallic dust that settled on every surface despite his efforts to maintain cleanliness. Heinrich paused frequently to wipe sweat from his face with a leather apron that bore the accumulated stains of countless similar days, the fabric darkened by soot and worn thin at the edges where sparks had burned small holes. The physical demands of blacksmithing took their toll on every man who practiced the trade, building powerful shoulders and arms, while gradually wearing down joints stressed by repetitive motions and sudden impacts. He had seen older smiths forced to retire early due to injuries or exhaustion, their livelihoods ending abruptly when their bodies could no longer withstand the punishment of daily forge work, a reminder that his current struggles with financial security might someday seem insignificant compared to the prospect of being unable to work at all. The midday meal provided a brief respite from the heat and noise of the workshop, though Heinrich could rarely afford to stop working for long when commissions awaited completion and customers expected prompt service. He and Klaus shared bread, cheese, and small beer in the narrow courtyard behind the building, where Heinrich's wife Greta maintained a small garden that provided vegetables to supplement their diet and herbs for treating the minor burns and cuts that were occupational hazards of metalworking. The meal was simple but adequate, reflecting the modest prosperity of skilled craftsmen who earned enough to avoid hunger but lacked the resources for luxury or extravagance. Heinrich's social position placed him above common laborers and agricultural workers, yet far below the merchants, guild masters, and nobility who controlled the larger flows of commerce and political power, creating a middle ground of respectability tempered by constant awareness of how quickly circumstances could change for the worse. Greta joined them briefly, carrying their infant daughter Anna and sharing news from the market where she had spent the morning purchasing supplies and gathering the gossip that connected their household to the broader life of the community. Her conversations with other craftsmen's wives provided valuable information about potential customers, changes in local regulations, and the general economic conditions that affected everyone's livelihood, creating an informal network of intelligence that supplemented the official communications of the guild system. She reported that the harvest had been adequate, but not abundant, meaning that farmers would have money for necessary repairs, but little to spend on improvements or luxuries. Information that would help Heinrich plan his work and pricing for the coming months. Her ability to manage their household finances and maintain relationships with suppliers and customers made her an essential partner in the business, though her contributions were rarely acknowledged in the formal structures that governed trade and commerce. The afternoon brought a commission that illustrated both the opportunities and frustrations of Heinrich's position in the urban economy. A wealthy merchant steward arrived seeking an ornate iron lock for a new strongbox, work that would pay well but required skills and materials that pushed the boundaries of what Heinrich could accomplish in his modest workshop. The design called for intricate filing and fitting that would consume days of careful labor, while the spring mechanisms demanded steel of a quality that cost significantly more than the wrought iron he typically used for everyday items. Such commissions offered the possibility of substantial profit, yet they also carried risks, since any mistakes would require him to absorb the cost of expensive materials while still delivering the promised work on schedule. The steward's manner made clear that the merchant expected perfection and would not hesitate to seek legal remedies through the guild courts if the finished lock failed to meet specifications or was delivered late. Heinrich accepted the commission despite his reservations, knowing that his reputation and future prospects depended on demonstrating his ability to handle challenging work. Even when the financial margins were uncertain and the technical demands stretched his capabilities, he spent considerable time discussing the specifications with the steward, making detailed sketches and taking precise measurements to ensure that the finished lock would fit properly and function smoothly for years of use. The negotiation process revealed the complex dynamics of medieval commerce, where craftsmen needed to balance their own interests against the expectations of customers who possessed greater economic power and legal protection. The final price represented a compromise that would provide Heinrich with a reasonable profit if everything went according to plan, yet left little margin for error or unexpected complications that might arise during the lengthy process of creating such an intricate mechanism from raw materials. The remainder of the afternoon was devoted to completing simpler tasks that provided steady income, while Heinrich mentally prepared for the challenges of the lock commission. He repaired a broken knife blade for the local butcher, straightened bent nails salvaged from a demolished building, and crafted a set of horseshoes for a traveling merchant whose animals needed attention before continuing their journey to distant markets. Each task required different techniques and tools, demonstrating the breadth of knowledge that successful blacksmiths needed to master in order to serve their communities effectively. The variety of work also provided some protection against economic fluctuations, since even during difficult times, people needed basic metalworking services, though the prices they could afford to pay might barely cover the costs of materials and labor, leaving craftsmen like Heinrich constantly balancing between maintaining quality standards and accepting whatever compensation customers could provide. As evening approached and the light streaming through the workshop's small windows began to fade, Heinrich and Klaus completed their preparations for the following day's work, banking the forge fire so that coals would remain alive until morning and organizing tools and materials for maximum efficiency. The daily ritual of closing the workshop involved careful attention to fire safety, since uncontrolled flames could destroy not only their building but entire neighborhoods of closely packed timber-framed structures that dominated medieval urban architecture. Heinrich checked that all hot metal had been properly cooled and that no sparks lingered in corners where they might ignite wood shavings or cloth, knowing that his insurance against such disasters consisted mainly of maintaining good relationships with neighbors who would help fight fires in exchange for similar assistance when needed. The guild provided some support for members who suffered losses due to accidents or theft, yet the assistance was limited and often insufficient to rebuild a destroyed workshop or replace expensive tools and materials. Klaus departed for his evening meal and rest, leaving Heinrich alone to complete the bookkeeping that tracked his income, expenses, and outstanding obligations in a simple ledger that recorded the financial reality of his trade in careful script. The numbers revealed the constant tension between earning enough to support his family and maintaining the workshop while setting aside reserves for the inevitable periods when work was scarce or materials were expensive. Medieval craftsmen operated with little margin for error, since banks were few and lending was restricted by religious prohibitions against usury, meaning that most business was conducted on the basis of personal relationships and reputation rather than formal financial instruments. Heinrich's accounts showed that he was meeting his current obligations, but accumulating little surplus for investment in better tools, workshop improvements, or the kind of reserves that would allow him to weather extended periods of economic difficulty without compromising his family's welfare or his ability to maintain professional standards. The evening meal brought the family together in the small living space above the workshop, where Greta had prepared a stew of vegetables from their garden, supplemented with a modest portion of meat purchased from the local butcher. The meal represented the typical diet of skilled craftsmen, adequate in quantity and nutrition, but lacking the variety and luxury that characterized the tables of wealthier citizens who could afford imported spices, fine wines, and exotic delicacies that arrived via the extensive trade networks connecting medieval Europe. Heinrich's social position allowed his family to eat regularly and well by the standards of their time, yet they remained acutely aware of how quickly illness, accident, or economic disruption could reduce them to the level of common laborers who struggled to afford basic necessities. The conversation around their simple wooden table reflected these realities, focusing on practical matters of work, community relationships, and the constant calculations necessary to maintain their modest prosperity in an uncertain world. After the meal, Heinrich spent time reviewing the sketches and specifications for the merchant's lock, studying the mechanical principles involved, and planning the sequence of operations that would transform raw steel into a functional security device. The commission represented the kind of advanced work that could establish his reputation as a craftsman capable of handling complex projects, potentially leading to more lucrative opportunities with wealthy customers who valued skill and reliability above low prices. Yet it also highlighted the limitations of his current workshop, which lacked some of the specialized tools and equipment that would make such work more efficient and profitable. Investments that required capital he could not easily obtain without compromising his family's immediate welfare. The challenge of balancing present needs against future opportunities was a constant theme in the lives of medieval craftsmen who needed to maintain their current operations while somehow finding resources for the improvements and expansions that would enhance their long-term prospects. The flickering light of oil lamps illuminated Heinrich's work as he carefully filed and shaped small steel components, the delicate nature of the task requiring concentration that blocked out the sounds of the neighborhood settling into evening quiet. This kind of precision work could only be accomplished during daylight hours or with expensive artificial lighting, limiting the time available for complex commissions and adding to their cost in ways that customers rarely understood or appreciated. The oil for his lamps represented a significant expense, yet one that was necessary for maintaining the quality standards that distinguished his work from that of less skilled competitors who might offer lower prices but could not match his attention to detail and craftsmanship. The economics of medieval manufacturing involved countless such calculations, where every decision about materials, techniques, and time allocation affected both the quality of finished products and the profitability of the enterprise, creating constant pressure to optimize processes while maintaining the standards that justified premium pricing. As the night deepened, Heinrich reflected on the broader context of his struggles, understanding that his individual challenges were part of larger economic and social changes that were transforming medieval society during the late 15th century. The growth of trade and commerce was creating new opportunities for skilled craftsmen, yet it was also intensifying competition and changing the traditional relationships between masters, journeymen, and apprentices that had provided stability for previous generations. New technologies and techniques were being developed in distant regions, sometimes making established methods obsolete and forcing craftsmen to adapt or risk losing their livelihoods to more innovative competitors. The political changes occurring throughout Europe affected local economies in ways that individual artisans could neither predict nor control, creating an environment where success depended not only on skill and hard work, but also on the ability to navigate increasingly complex social and economic relationships that extended far beyond the boundaries of local communities. The challenge of maintaining his workshop and supporting his family while adapting to these changing conditions required Heinrich to make difficult decisions about how to allocate his limited time and resources among competing priorities. He needed to complete current commissions satisfactorily while seeking new customers and opportunities for growth, maintain his equipment and workspace while investing in improvements that would enhance his capabilities, and preserve the traditional relationships that provided stability while exploring new approaches that might offer greater prosperity. The guild system that had once provided clear guidelines for such decisions was itself evolving in response to changing economic conditions, creating uncertainty about the rules and expectations that would govern his trade in the coming years. These broader concerns weighed heavily on Heinrich's mind as he worked late into the night, understanding that his success or failure would be determined not only by his individual efforts, but also by forces largely beyond his control. The completion of each small component for the merchant's lock represented progress toward a goal that seemed both achievable and frustratingly distant, requiring patience and persistence in equal measure while providing little immediate gratification or financial return. Heinrich's experience had taught him that complex projects often revealed unexpected challenges that demanded creative solutions and additional time. Yet customers rarely showed understanding or flexibility when such complications arose, expecting craftsmen to absorb any additional costs while still delivering perfect results on schedule. The pressure to maintain reputation and customer relationships while protecting his own economic interests created constant stress that affected not only Heinrich but his entire family, who shared in both the risks and rewards of his professional endeavors. The interconnected nature of medieval urban life meant that his success or failure as a craftsman influenced his family's social position, his apprentices' future prospects, and his relationships with neighbors and fellow guild members who formed the network of mutual support that sustained their community. The late hours provided quiet time for the kind of detailed work that required complete concentration, yet they also highlighted the isolation that often accompanied the life of a medieval craftsman who spent long hours alone with his tools and materials, developing an intimate understanding of his craft that few others could fully appreciate or understand. Heinrich's knowledge of metallurgy, mechanics, and manufacturing techniques represented years of accumulated experience that could not be easily transferred or replicated, making him valuable to his community while also making him vulnerable to the physical limitations and economic uncertainties that threatened all manual workers. The specialized nature of his skills meant that he could command higher prices than common laborers. Yet it also meant that his options were limited if local demand for his services declined or if injury prevented him from continuing to work at his current level of productivity and quality. The rhythm of hammer strikes echoing softly through the night-quiet workshop created a meditative atmosphere that allowed Heinrich to lose himself in the ancient dance between craftsman and material, the dialogue between human intention and natural properties that had defined metalworking since the earliest civilizations. This connection to tradition provided both comfort and responsibility, linking him to generations of smiths who had faced similar challenges while reminding him of his obligation to preserve and transmit the knowledge and skills that would enable future craftsmen to continue the trade. The tools he used bore the marks of previous owners, their handles worn smooth by countless hands and their surfaces bearing the patina of age and use that testified to their reliability and value, creating a tangible connection to the past that enriched his understanding of his place in the continuing story of human craftsmanship and technological development. As midnight approached and the sounds of the city faded to the occasional footstep of a night watchman or the distant barking of dogs, Heinrich carefully extinguished his lamps and secured his work, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities in the endless cycle of creation and commerce that defined his existence. The lock components, still incomplete but showing promise of eventual success, represented both the immediate pressures he faced and the longer-term possibilities that made his struggles worthwhile, embodying the hope that skill and persistence might eventually lead to greater prosperity and security. His workshop, filled with the tools and materials of his trade, stood ready for another day of transformation and creation, a small center of industry and innovation that contributed to the larger economic and social fabric of medieval urban life while providing a modest livelihood for his family and a foundation for their modest ambitions and dreams. The final tasks of the evening included checking that all fires were properly banked and that valuable tools and materials were secured against the possibility of theft, reminders of the various risks and uncertainties that complicated every aspect of medieval urban life, from the constant threat of fire and crime to the economic fluctuations that could transform prosperity into poverty with little warning or opportunity for preparation. Heinrich's precautions reflected hard-won experience and the advice of older craftsmen who had survived various disasters and setbacks, understanding that success required not only skill and hard work, but also careful attention to the countless details that could determine the difference between prosperity and ruin. The guild system provided some protection and support, yet ultimately each craftsman was responsible for his own welfare and that of his dependents, creating a culture of self-reliance tempered by mutual assistance and shared knowledge that helped individuals navigate the challenges of their demanding and uncertain profession. Heinrich's final thoughts before retiring focused on the balance between present necessities and future possibilities. The constant calculation that determined how he allocated his time, energy, and resources among the competing demands of family, customers, and professional development that shaped every decision and colored every relationship in his complex and demanding life. The merchant's lock commission represented both an opportunity to demonstrate his capabilities and a risk that could strain his resources and reputation if complications arose, embodying the fundamental uncertainty that characterized the lives of medieval craftsmen who operated without the safety nets and support systems that would later develop to protect workers and small business owners from the vicissitudes of economic change and personal misfortune. His modest workshop and simple home represented the fruits of years of labor and learning, achievements that provided satisfaction and security while remaining vulnerable to the forces of change that were transforming the world around him in ways he could observe, but not fully understand or control. Thus, Heinrich Müller lived and worked in the autumn of 1487, his daily struggles and small triumphs representative of countless medieval craftsmen who formed the backbone of urban economies while navigating the complex challenges of their demanding and uncertain profession. His life revealed the reality behind romantic notions of medieval craftsmanship, showing how skill and artistry emerged from the practical necessities of earning a living and supporting a family, in a world where success required not only technical competence but also business acumen, social skills, and the resilience to persevere through setbacks and disappointments that were inevitable parts of the craftsman's experience. The rhythm of his days, marked by the ring of hammer on anvil and the glow of forge fire, created both the material foundation of medieval civilization and the human stories of ambition, struggle, and modest achievement that gave meaning to the larger historical forces and social changes that historians would later document and analyze.